Welcome back. In today's video, we discuss my top 24 tight ends for the 2024 fantasy football season. So the F tier consists of Mike Gesicki and Hunter Henry. So Mike Gesicki, the tight end for the Cincinnati Bengals, was just signed in the offseason. He's 6'6", 247, and is 28.8 years old. So this guy is actually the fourth most athletic tight end of all time. His 4.5 440-yard dash is in the 96th percentile. His 118.7 speed score is in the 97th percentile. His 137.1 burst score is in the 99th percentile. His 10.86 agility grade is in the 98th percentile. And his 10.65 catch radius is in the 100th percentile. So this guy was an athletic specimen coming out. And it did take him a second to start dominating, as in just in his second season. He's finished as the tight end 55, 12, 7, 9, and then the past two seasons, he's fallen off a little bit. His last season with Miami, he was the tight end 23. And this past season with the New England Patriots, he was the tight end 37. And he did this while averaging the 58th, 13th, 8th, 14th, 29th, and 38th most fantasy points per game. So admittedly, it has been 2 years since we've seen Mike Gesicki be a relevant fantasy option for us. And so that's why he's a little bit lower, but his potential really is sky high. He's now in a different situation with the Cincinnati Bengals. He figures to probably be their third or at worst fourth target. They obviously have Jamar Chase, who's going to be the leading target earner. Then they have T. Higgins. He's probably going to be second. But after that, it is completely open. They did select Eric All in the 2024 NFL draft, but tight ends generally, unless they're elite top shelf talents, generally take a little bit to develop. So I do expect Mike Gesicki to lead the tight end rooms substantially in terms of earned targets. And we did have a couple weeks of somewhat borderline fantasy success with Drew Sample this past season while not having Joe Burrow. So I do think there's a chance for week-to-week spikes for Mike Gesicki. Being the third option in this Bengals offense, he's probably going to have an inconsistent floor, but you also don't have to draft him that high either. So he is a good late round lottery ticket because there's always a chance he could possibly finish as a high end tight end 2. And if he gets really lucky, maybe a low end tight end 1. So we'll have to see though, because it has been 2 years since he's been fantasy relevant. So at tight end 23, I have Hunter Henry of the New England Patriots. He's 6'5", 250, and he's 29.6 years old. So he is starting to creep up there in age. He finished his past season as a tight end 18. Now, in terms of his athleticism, he's an average athlete. His 4.7 340-yard dash is in the 63rd percentile. His 100.7 speed score is in the 66th percentile. His 111.6 burst score is in the 24th percentile. His 11.57 agility grade is in the 50th percentile. And his 9.95 catch radius is in the 42nd percentile. So in terms of fantasy finishes, he's finished as the tight end 20, 15, 9, 13, 10, 22, and 19, while averaging the 17th, 7th, 8th, 10th, 15th, 26th, and 15th most fantasy points per game. So he's been a fine tight end 2 in terms of his points per game most seasons, while peaking as a low-end tight end 1. This year, however, his quarterback situation is a little bit murky. So they have Jacoby Brissett. He's going to start out the year as a starter. Then they did draft Drake May, who I do believe in long term, but in the short term, I'm not necessarily that high on him. And it's more so to do with the talent around him and the fact that he does need to develop a little bit. So I do expect this to be among the league's worst passing offenses. Now, in terms of target competition, it's completely wide open, so that is good for him. They have Jalen Polk, who they drafted at the top of the second round. He's going to probably be a flanker for them. They have Kendrick Bourne, who's probably going to be their X, although Javon Baker, who they also drafted, could potentially play X for them. They have Pop Douglas in the slot, obviously Hunter Henry, and Ramondre Stevenson is an above-average pass-catching back, so he's probably going to get a good amount of targets, and they're generally going to want to run the ball a lot, so while they are going to have to pass somewhat because they're probably going to be one of the league's worst teams this season, I don't really think that the targets are necessarily going to be the best this season, and they're probably going to be spread out. So I think he's going to have a very inconsistent floor this year, and his ceiling probably isn't that high. There's just options in front of him that have a lot more upside and a lot more stability at the quarterback position. So the next tier consists of Noah Fant, Tucker Kraft, Cade Otton, and Luke Musgrave. So at tight end 22, I have Noah Fant. He's 6'4", 249, and is 26.7 years old. And he's also the 12th most athletic tight end of all time. So in terms of his metrics, his 4.50 40-yard dash is in the 98th percentile. His 120.8 speed score is in the 97th percentile. His 132.6 burst score is in the 97th percentile. His 11.03 agility score is in the 96th percentile. And his 10.45 catch radius is in the 98th percentile. So overall, one of the most athletic tight ends we've seen. So in terms of his fantasy finishes, he's finished as the tight end 17, 8, 12, 17, and 31 the past couple of seasons. And he's done this on the back of the 23rd, 11th, 12th, 23rd, and 36th most fantasy points per game. So he has just always been in a terrible situation. He was with the Broncos initially. Then he was traded in the Russell Wilson trade to the Seattle Seahawks. And under Shane Waldron, their offensive coordinator, he likes to use multiple tight ends. So Fant has never had a consistent amount of targets as much as he really deserves. Now, they did bring in Ryan Grubb, the Washington Huskies offensive coordinator formerly. I do like that for Noah Fant. I think he's going to use Noah Fant more often in the passing game compared to the other tight ends in the room. It's just that he's going to be at best the fourth option. They have DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and JSN. So being fourth in the pecking order, it does limit his upside. He's going to have flash weeks here and there, but his floor, once again, is going to be a little bit inconsistent. It's just that with his amazing athletic profile, his ceiling is raised above some of the other tight ends in the league because he's just able to score from longer distances. I will say, though, his 2.35 yards of target separation this past season was good for second in the NFL. So he is adept at getting open. We'll just have to see, being the fourth option in this Ryan Grubb offense, what his targets are looking like. I just think that limits his potential upside, but he is going to have boom weeks here and there. At tight end 21, I have Tucker Kraft of the Green Bay Packers. So he's 6'5", 254, and he's 23.7 years old. He's going into his second season. He's coming off a tight end 28 finish as a rookie. So in terms of his athleticism, his 4.69 40-yard dash was in the 73rd percentile. His 105.8 speed score is in the 81st percentile. His 120.5 burst score is in the 68th percentile. His 11.37 agility score is in the 75th percentile. And his 10.11 catch radius is in the 74th percentile. So he is an above average athlete at the tight end position, which does lend itself to more potential upside. He is, however, in Green Bay. He's splitting time with another tight end in this tier, Luke Musgrave. However, it is a Shanahan offense, and it does project to be one of the better offenses in the league. And his 4.6 fantasy points per game were 33rd in the NFL among the tight end position, but it wasn't really fair to him because at the beginning of the year, he wasn't getting any run. And so like half of his games, he basically didn't do anything, but then he really started to come on at the end of the year when Luke Musgrave was hurt. So I do project him to be in a split role, which really prevents either one of them from being much higher in these ranks. I do expect him to be a little bit more consistent now that he should have earned a larger role in the offense. So his 2.28 yards of target separation were good for sixth in the NFL, which is even more impressive when you consider his 8.9 yards per target were good for fifth, and his 1.96 fantasy points per target were good for sixth in the NFL. So on a per target basis, he was a very efficient tight end for us in fantasy. Like I said, it's just a little bit crowded with Luke Musgrave there. Now, in terms of the overall target competition, they have Christian Watson, they have Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, and Jaden Reed. So it really is up in the air as to who can establish himself as a potential top target. I do expect it to be a relatively mixed bag from week to week. I expect of all these players, Jaden Reed's probably going to be the leading fantasy scorer. But if there was to be an injury to Luke Musgrave, this guy would move way further up in my rankings. So at tight end 20, I have Cade Otton of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So he's finished as a tight end 19 and 26 the past two seasons. And in terms of his athleticism, he is a slightly below average athlete at the tight end position. His 4.78 40-yard dash speed are in the 48th percentile, giving him a 94.6 speed score, which is in the 44th percentile. He's more so of just a complete tight end than he is necessarily as a specific pass-catching tight end. So he's 6'5", 245, and is 25.3 years old. He's finished as the tight end 27 and 23 in fantasy points per game. So I do think he was starting to break out in the playoffs this past season. For instance, in the wild card, he had 8 for 89 on 11 targets. And then in the divisional, he had 8 targets with 5 for 65 and a touchdown. So he's starting to get a little bit more consistency. The only issue is Dave Canales left the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so their offensive efficiency is likely to go down. And in terms of the pecking order, he's definitely behind Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And then he's potentially behind Rachaad White. One thing he does have going for him, though, is he was second in total routes run among the tight end position. And his 100% snap share was number 1 in the league. So he is always on the field. And so obviously it helps to always be on the field because that means you're going to be on the field essentially every time that there's a passing play. It's just with him being third at best or potentially fourth in terms of the pecking order in a non-Dave Canales offense this season, his consistency probably isn't going to be there, but he does have a good amount of upside from week to week. So at tight end 19, I have Luke Musgrave of the Green Bay Packers. So he's 6'6", 253, and he's 23.9 years old. He was a rookie this past season, so he's going into his second year. He did miss a little bit of time, but at the beginning of the season, he was the starting tight end for the Packers. He is, however, going to be in a split tight end room, I project, with Tucker Kraft. He is, however, the 18th most athletic tight end of all time because he's 6'6", 253, with a 4.61 40-yard dash, which is in the 89th percentile in and of itself, giving him a 114.4 speed score, which is in the 94th percentile, a 125.5 burst score, which is in the 87th percentile, an 11.5 agility score, which is in the 61st percentile, and a 10.19 catch radius, which is in the 84th percentile. Now, one thing is his 2.78 yards of target separation were good for first in the NFL, and he did this while averaging 7.7 yards per target, which was good for 11th. So it wasn't as though he was just being used right at the line of scrimmage. So he is the seam-stretching tight end for the Packers, and given that he was number 1 in target separation, he's very adept at getting open. Like I said, with Tucker Kraft, the only issue is that he's going to be in a split tight end room, and there's just a lot of mouths to feed, but fortunately, there is no established number 1 or number 2, really. So Luke Musgrave's ceiling is a little bit limited, and his floor has been a little bit reduced by the fact that Tucker Kraft is there. But should Tucker Kraft get injured, Luke Musgrave is going way up these rankings. He's incredibly athletic, he's adept at getting open, and he has the ability to challenge defenses vertically. And with this being the LaFleur scheme, it's a derivative of the Shanahan scheme. It's going to be incredibly efficient. Jordan Love was just signed to an extension. He looked fantastic at the end of the year. On a week-to-week basis, he does offer a good amount of upside. It's just that his floor is going to be severely limited with there being so many mouths to feed and another solid tight end in the tight end room. So at tight end 18, I have Ben Sinnott of the Washington Commanders. So he's 6'4", 250 pounds, and is 22.1 years old. Now, with him being a rookie, it is potentially a little bit difficult to know exactly what his upside is going to be, but I do like him a lot. So he goes to the Commanders. They just drafted Jaden Daniels, so there is potential for at least a massive quarterback upgrade compared to what the Commanders had this past season. And besides Terry McLaurin, there really isn't an established number 2 in this offense. Jahan Dotson was very overrated after his rookie year. And this past season, he is a little bit better than his stats suggest, but he's nothing incredibly special. Then they did sign Austin Eckler, so he's going to receive a good amount of targets, but there is a solid opportunity for Ben Sinnott to become the number 2 target in this offense. All he has to do is beat out Zach Ertz. Trey McBride, who is more talented in my opinion than Ben Sinnott, kicked him out of Arizona this past season, and I expect Ben Sinnott to quickly establish himself as the number 1 option. This guy has absolute positional versatility. Besides probably playing X, he can be a flanker, he could be a fullback, He can be an inline tight end, a slot receiver. This guy is, in my opinion, a poor man's George Kittle. So in terms of his athleticism, he is the 32nd most athletic tight end of all time. His 4.68 40-yard dash is in the 77th percentile. His 103.7 speed score is in the 76th percentile. His 133.0 burst score is in the 98th percentile. His 11.05 agility score is in the 95th percentile. And his 10.36 catch radius is in the 96th percentile. So overall, a very athletic tight end. Like I said, I comp him to a poor man's George Kittle. He can be used all over the offense. And I do project him to easily overtake Zach Ertz. And there's ample opportunity for him to establish himself as the number 2 option in the new Jaden Daniels-led offense that's going to be led by Cliff Kingsbury in terms of their offensive coordinator. So in Cliff Kingsbury's offense, they like to run the air raid, and it's a very good scheme fit for Jaden Daniels. And I think that with everything spread out, it's really going to help Ben Sinnott because he's going to be easily able to take advantage of just about any linebacker covering him. And with him being 6'4", he does have the potential to outmatch safeties. He's just going to have to work on his route running a little bit, but he's a versatile tight end, and I do think that he can be a solid tight end too for you with a very good amount of upside if he is able to establish himself as a second option. So at tight end 17, I have Cole Kmet of the Chicago Bears. He is 6'4", 262, and is 25.4 years old. So in his career, he's finished as a tight end 44, 21, 7, and 8. And he's done this on the back of the 47th, 21st, 16th, and 9th most fantasy points per game. He is a much better talent than his ranking here suggests. The only issue is they brought in a ton of target competition in Chicago. Although, to be fair, they did bring in what, in my opinion, projects to be an incredible quarterback upgrade. I do project Caleb Williams to be among the league's best quarterbacks in due time. It's just now Cole Kmet has to contend with 3 wide receiver ones, another solid pass-catching tight end, and a solid pass-catching running back. So they have Rome Odunze to play X, they have DJ Moore to be a flanker, and Keenan Allen to generally play the slot. Then DeAndre Swift is going to receive his targets. So Cole Kmet could potentially at best be the 4th option in this offense, and at worst probably be the 5th option. So I do think his week-to-week consistency is not going to be there. But on any given week, he does have a very good amount of upside in a Caleb Williams-led offense. And in terms of his actual skills as a tight end, his 100% true catch rate was good for 1st in the NFL, and his 77.8 contested catch rate was also good for 1st. And his 0.43 fantasy points per route were good for 7th, and his fantasy points per target of 1.99 were good for 5th. So on a per target and per snap basis, he is one of the better tight ends in the NFL. He's more of a possession tight end. It's just going to be unfortunate for him that his upside and especially his floor is going to be a little bit capped this season. But once again, it's not due to any lack of talent on his end. So the final tight end in the D tier and my tight end 16 this year is Dalton Schultz of the Houston Texans. He is coming off a tight end 10 finish, and in his career he's finished as a tight end 72, 117, 12, 3, 11, and 10. Now in terms of his athleticism, he isn't a particularly great tight end in that regard. His 4.75 40-yard dash is in the 56th percentile. His 96.6 speed score is in the 52nd percentile. His 116.0 burst score is in the 45th percentile. Now, his 11.4 agility score is in the 72nd percentile, but his 9.97 catch radius is in the 46th percentile. This guy finds himself in a mixed bag of a situation. Now, while it's amazing to have CJ Stroud as your quarterback, he was incredibly impressive, very, very accurate coming out, and especially in his rookie year. And he did command the offense and was very effective in the Bobby Slowick scheme, which is a derivative of the Shanahan scheme. The only issue is he already had incredible target competition before with Tank Dell and Nico Collins. Well, now they also have Stephon Diggs, so he has 3 very talented wide receivers who are definitely going to be ahead of him in the pecking order. They also signed Joe Mixon at running back, so they're more than likely going to run a little bit more this season than they did, and Joe Mixon is a capable receiving back as well. So his week-to-week consistency just is not going to be there. But any playmaker in this offense has an incredible amount of week-to-week upside. He's just not going to be reliable for you on a week-to-week basis. A couple stats to like, though, are his 1.58 yards per out run this past season. They were good for 10th. I think it's going to suffer just a little bit, but once again, not due to any lack of talent on his end. And his 0.38 fantasy points per route were good for 11th. So on a per route basis, in combination with the fact that his quarterback is CJ Stroud, he is a very solid tight end. He's just going to be a victim of circumstance, just like with Cole Kmet before him. So the C tier consists of Dallas Goedert, TJ Hawkinson, Taysom Hill, and Pat Freiermuth. So at tight end 15, I have Dallas Goedert. So in his career, he's finished as a tight end 21, 10, 21, 11, 12, and 13. And he's done this on the back of the 22nd, 11th, 9th, 8th, 5th, and 12th most fantasy points per game. Now, the only issue is he's never, ever been able to finish inside the top 10. And so while he's been a very consistent and solid tight end, and even though he's cracked the top 10 on a points per game basis, he's generally missed time every year. And he's just never been able to put together an incredible season of consistent dominance for you. However, though, he is 6'5", 256, and at 29.6, he should still have a little bit of juice left. As far as his athleticism, his 4.69 40-yard dash is in the 74th percentile, his 106.7 speed scores in the 82nd percentile, his 121.8 burst scores in the 73rd percentile, his 11.33 agility scores in the 79th percentile, and his 10.16 catch radius is in the 80th percentile. And I will say his 1.28 yards per team pass attempt was good for 11th in the NFL this past year. I have him a little bit further down in my rankings than his previous couple of fantasy finishes because the Eagles did sign Saquon Barkley, so I think they're going to run the ball a little bit more, thus reducing his total target share. See, he finished with 83 targets this past season, which was good for 14th in the NFL. I think that's going to go down just slightly. I do think Saquon Barkley is going to command a larger target share than DeAndre Swift did this past year and Kenny Gainwell. And with them, in my opinion, passing a little bit less this season, and then with Saquon Barkley probably commanding more targets in the passing game, along with the fact that Dallas Goedert is at best third in the pecking order behind A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, I think that his upside on a week-to-week basis is a little bit more limited than it has been in past seasons, but he should still be a solid floor tight end for you. It's just that really all the tight ends going before him have a lot more either upside on a week-to-week basis or a higher floor, which just, in my opinion, makes them a better bet for you in 2024. So my tight end 14 is TJ Hawkinson of the Minnesota Vikings. So he's 6'5", 251, and is 27.1 years old. So throughout his career, he's finished as a tight end 32, 5, 15, 2, and 4, while averaging the 24th, 7th, 4th, and 2nd most fantasy points per game at the tight end position. So there's a couple of issues here. He suffered an ACL tear in Week 16 of this past season. So while the Vikings were saying that he's not ruled out for Week 1, that's not the same thing as it being remotely likely that he's going to be available for Week 1. He's on the PUP list for now. I suspect that he's going to miss a couple of games, then get off to a little bit of a slow start before he really starts to pick up steam at the end of the year. Now, there are a couple of issues here. They do not have Kirk Cousins anymore, who was one of the most fantasy-friendly quarterbacks imaginable. They do have Sam Darnold, and their 2024 first-round draft pick, J.J. McCarthy, tore his meniscus and had to have season-ending surgery. So in a Sam Darnold-led offense, I'm much less optimistic about the total upside here, at least compared to his upside before. Although Kevin O'Connell is one of the better head coaches in the league, so the scheming is still going to be there. It's just, is the quarterback play going to allow it? Now, in terms of his athleticism, his 4.70 40-yard dash was in the 71st percentile, his 103.7 speed scores in the 76th percentile, his 127.1 burst scores in the 90th percentile, his 11.2 agility scores in the 88th percentile, and his 10.27 catch radius is in the 92nd percentile. And now, he is one of the better tight ends in the league. His 1.73 yards per team pass attempt this past season was good for 2nd. His 0.44 fantasy points per target. We're good for 6th. And he did finish 4th in total fantasy points. Obviously, he is a tight end 4. And he still projects to probably be the second option, or at worst now the third option when he does come back from injury and get back to his old self. He's still only 27 years old, so it's not as if he's ancient or anything. They're still going to have Justin Jefferson as the clear number 1 in this offense. Now, the question is Jordan Addison going to end up out-targeting TJ Hawkinson? So another question is it necessarily scheme-dependent that TJ Hawkinson is generally the second target this past season, or is it a combination of scheme and Kirk Cousins' preference? We'll have to see with Sam Darnold. I do expect the overall ceiling of this offense to be lowered just a little bit due to Sam Darnold starting, but I think once he gets back and going, he's going to offer you a very, very good amount of upside simply because he's incredibly talented. And I think that right around tight end 14 is right, because he's not going to help you out for basically the first half of the season, most likely. But once he does get going, he should really, really get going. So at tight end 13, I have Taysom Hill of the New Orleans Saints. He's 6'2", 221, and is 33.9 years old. And this guy is an insane athlete, especially considering he's able to put up the production he has at over 30 years old. So his 4.5 140-yard dash is in the 98th percentile. His 103.5 speed score is in the 75th percentile. His 128.4 burst score is in the 98th percentile. His 11.4 agility scores in the 60th percentile. And his 10.16 catch radius is in the 79th percentile. So this guy is a quarterback, receiver, running back, and tight end, as well as a fullback sometimes. And he can even be used in the slot. So he has the most positional versatility, literally probably anyone in the entire league, which does on a week-to-week basis give you a crazy amount of upside for one of the tight ends that you don't have to draft in the top 10. The only issue is he does have a lot of week-to-week volatility. I do expect, though, the Saints are going to want to continue to use him in the red zone and prominently hand him the reins over Derek Carr so that they can actually score points. I think that Dennis Allen probably wants to keep his job, and if he does want to do that, he's going to take the ball out of Derek Carr's hands as much as he possibly can. And so Taysom Hill has finished as the tight end 61, 21, 10, 29, and 12 the past couple of years. So like I said, he does have week-to-week volatility, but when he gets going, he can put up 15 or more points for weeks in a row, and it's just about knowing when to get off the ride. But on a week-to-week basis, this guy provides absolutely elite upside and is one of the better bets for a touchdown on a week-to-week basis due to his positional versatility in this offense. So my tight end 12 is Pat Freiermuth. So Pat Freiermuth is coming off a tight end 29 finish, but he had the tight end 13 and 8 finish in his first 2 seasons, while averaging the 16th, 12th, and 27th most fantasy points per game in his first 3 seasons. I do like him this year because, yes, while Arthur Smith is going to be their offensive coordinator, he is not going to have the decisions in terms of personnel. That is ultimately going to be Mike Tomlin, and Mike Tomlin isn't going to be featuring Calvin Austin over his premier targets. He's not going to be pulling out third-string running backs from the practice squad to try to feature in his offense. He's not going to have control over that, and thus I think the potential detriment to Pat Freiermuth from Arthur Smith being his coordinator is going to be negated due to the fact that he's not going to have say in that. Now, in terms of his athleticism, he is not the most athletic tight end. He's more of just a very technically sound tight end. His 4.8 240-yard dash is in the 39th percentile, giving him a 93.7 speed score, which is in the 40th percentile. And this tight end 12 ranking is contingent on the Steelers not ending up trading for Brandon Ayuk. If they do add Brandon Ayuk, he's going to go quite a bit down because the target share is going to go substantially down. And Pat Freiermuth would be further up in these rankings if it wasn't for the offense being projected to be among the league's worst in the NFL. Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are not scaring anybody. Russell Wilson is steadily declining, and now while his play last year is generally viewed as worse than it actually was. He is on the decline, and Justin Fields is just not a good quarterback. He's not able to get through his reads. He can't hit the middle of the field, which would be terrible for Pat Freiermuth. But I do project Russell Wilson to be the starter, which is why I have Pat Freiermuth here. But like I said, with them probably being among the league's worst point-scoring offenses, and it being an Arthur Smith run-heavy offense and the power run game, I think his upside isn't quite what it could be if they had a better scheme, but I do think he's going to have a very, very solid floor, and he's going to have potential for a very high target share because the only players ahead of him in the passing game, well, the only player really is going to be George Pickens, assuming they don't trade for Brandon Ayuk. So the next tier consists of David Njoku, Brock Bowers, and Jake Ferguson. So at tight end 11, I have David Njoku. He's coming off a tight end 6 finish, and his finishes he tight end 25, 9, 86, 49, 23, 10, and 6. He did deal with injuries in his third and fourth season, so he's generally been a much better tight end than some of those fantasy finishes suggest. And he's finished with the 28th, 10th, 45th, 24th, 8th, and 7th most fantasy points per game. His season this past year was a tale of two halves. At the beginning with Deshaun Watson, things were not going well and he wasn't very consistent, but then when Joe Flacco took over, he took off. So with him being 6'4", 246 and still only 28.1 years old, he still should have some juice left, and he is the 28th most athletic tight end of all time. So his 4.64 40-yard dash is in the 85th percentile, his 105.6 speed score is in the 81st percentile, his 132.1 burst score is in the 97th percentile, his 11.31 agility score is in the 81st percentile, and his 10.31 catch radius is in the 94th percentile. So he's a very, very, very good athlete, even by NFL standards. And his skill in particular is yards after catch. His 599 yards after catch were good for first in the NFL. And on a per snap basis, he's very good at getting you fantasy points. His 0.4 fantasy points per route were good for 8th in the NFL. And his 1.47 yards per team pass attempt was also good for 7th in the NFL. The only issue is Deshaun Watson is going to be the quarterback, so there might be some regression from where he was this past season. But I think these past 2 seasons, he's really starting to show us a lot of upside. And when we conceptualize the Browns' offense, Nick Chubb is coming back off another devastating knee injury. Jerome Ford is fine. Dante Foreman is a good power back when he's able to stay healthy. So overall, the run game is not going to be as dominant as it has been in years past, in my opinion, and I think they're going to have to pass a little bit more. He does have to deal with Amari Cooper at wide receiver 1, but after that, all he has to do is beat out Jerry Jeudy. I definitely think that David Njoku is going to be second in terms of the pecking order among the receiving options. And I think that on a week-to-week basis, he's going to offer you a very solid floor with the potential for huge boom weeks when he does hit. So at tight end 10, I have Brock Bowers of the Las Vegas Raiders. So he's 6'3", 243 and is only 21.6 years old. He is a rookie. Now, in terms of his athleticism, his 4.53 40-yard dash is in the 96th percentile, and his 113.3 speed score is in the 93rd percentile. In terms of an athlete, this guy is dominant. He is in the Sam Laporta build. This guy has just about the most, besides Taysom Hill, because he can play quarterback. Brock Bowers probably has the second most positional versatility of any tight end there is. You can play him at X, you can play him as a flanker, you can play him in the slot, you can play him at inline tight end, he can be a halfback for you or a fullback if you really want. This guy's adept at yards after the catch, he breaks tackles with the best of them, and he is one of the only tight ends I've ever seen as a freshman in college to have a 20% target share, and he did so at Georgia. This guy is absolutely dominant, so you might be asking yourself, why is he the tight end 10? It's strictly due to the situation. He's a rookie tight end going into an offense that already has an established dominant number 1 in Davante Adams, who, despite the fact that he is declining somewhat, is still one of the premier wide receivers in the NFL. He's coming off a 33% target share in 2023. I project that's going to be somewhere around 29 to 30% with Brock Bowers there. So I do project that Brock Bowers is going to be the number 2 option in this offense, but he is in a tight end room that consists of him and 2023 second-round pick Michael Mayer, who is a very highly regarded prospect in his own right and had a solid season when he was given the opportunities to succeed. So overall, I think he's going to have a massive ceiling on a week-to-week basis, but his floor is going to be a little bit lower than we would prefer with some of the guys going ahead of him, strictly due to the fact that they want to run the ball and their projected quarterback play is not going to be good, while he's also going to be definitely the number 2 target in this offense. So at tight end 9, I have Jake Ferguson of the Dallas Cowboys. He's 6'5", 250, and is 25.5 years old. So he's going into his 3rd season with the Cowboys. He was a little bit older as a prospect coming out. He does find himself in a very good situation, though. His quarterback being Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott loves tight ends, and he's firmly the number 2 option in this offense. Now, he is a distant number 2 behind CeeDee Lamb, but being the number 2 option on an offense is pretty good for a tight end. Now, as far as being an athlete, he is not the best athlete. His 4.81 40-yard dash is in the 40th percentile. His 94.1 speed score is in the 42nd percentile. His 114.1 burst score is in the 34th percentile. His 11.51 agility score is in the 59th percentile. And his 9.92 catch radius is in the 36th percentile. He's just a much better tight end technically than he is as an athlete, and he's in a great situation, which work together to provide him with a lot more upside than he would have in most offenses. Now, he does offer a very high amount of upside. In his playoff game, for instance, this past season, his 10 catches for 93 yards and 3 touchdowns were absolutely crazy. Now, Dallas was behind, so they were throwing, and he was getting a lot of targets underneath, which they were giving to them, but still, that is representative of the potential upside he does have in this offense. Now, he is a very good yards after catch athlete. His 425 yards after catch were good for 6th. And in terms of his target share, his 102 targets were good for 7th in the NFL. I don't expect that to change. So I do think that with his scheme fit here, his connection to quarterback Dak Prescott, and the overall offense being projected to be one of the league's better offenses, I think he's going to give you a relatively safe floor, but with a massive ceiling on a week-to-week basis. And I think that once again, in 2024 fantasy football, he's going to be a top 10 tight end for you, albeit a low-end tight end 1. So the next tier consists of Kyle Pitts and George Kittle. So my tight end 8 is Kyle Pitts. I do want to move him a lot higher up this list, to be honest with you, but I do want to see him put together a high-end tight end 1 season before I really do move him over some of these other people. But he's 6'6", 245 pounds, and is only 23.8 years old despite going into his 4th season in the NFL. So as far as being an athlete, this guy is crazy. He's 6'6", 245, and his 4.49 40-yard dash is in the 99th percentile. His 123.1 speed score is in the 99th percentile. His 123.1 burst score is in the 78th percentile. His 11.47 agility score is in the 65th percentile. And his 10.2 catch radius is in the 85th percentile. And overall, he is the 40th most athletic tight end in NFL history. So when we look at his career, he was the 2nd tight end to ever have 1,000 receiving yards as a rookie. Then he had a knee injury and had to suffer under Marcus Mariota and Arthur Smith as his head coach. Then he came back and was slow this past season. His MCL tear hampered his side-to-side agility. He should be back to full strength this season. And then he had to suffer under Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke, as well as Arthur Smith, who was trying to feature third-string tight ends and practice squad receivers over his star players. It was baffling and very frustrating for everybody. But this year, they have Zach Robinson coming in from the Los Angeles Rams as their offensive coordinator, so they're going to have the Rams scheme. And Pitts also has 2 quarterback upgrades. They signed Kirk Cousins, who's one of the most fantasy-friendly quarterbacks imaginable for his targets. And then they drafted Michael Penix in the top 10. So both of his quarterbacks, no matter which one it is going to be much better than everything he's had his entire career. I mean, up to this point, the ghost of Matt Ryan was the best quarterback he's ever played with. And his catchable target percentage and target accuracy rating were both 37th in the NFL among the tight end position. That's how awful his targets were. And one thing to like is the Rams scheme generally features 1 or 2 options primarily in the passing game, and that's going to be Drake London and Kyle Pitts. They're going to easily be the top target earners in this offense, and his only competition after that is Darnell Mooney, and he's absolutely going to out-target Darnell Mooney. This guy is going to have a very safe floor and a crazy ceiling on a week-to-week basis. I think he's going to score a good amount of touchdowns this year. And I'd once again prefer to move him way higher in these rankings, but I do want to see it before I move him over some of these more proven players. But once again, on a week-to-week basis, the sky is the absolute limit for this guy. And one thing about the tight ends in this tier, Kyle Pitts and George Kittle could both finish as the tight end 1 overall, and nobody should be remotely surprised. Now, I don't have them projected to be, but it is well within the range of outcomes. So as far as George Kittle, I have him at tight end 7. He's coming off a tight end 5 finish this past year. He is 30.8 years old, so he is starting to creep up there a little bit in age. But he's the 22nd most athletic tight end of all time. His 4.52 40-yard dash is in the 96th percentile. His 117.7 speed score is in the 96th percentile. His 127.3 burst score is in the 91st percentile. His 10.83 agility score is in the 99th percentile. And his 10.35 catch radius is in the 95th percentile. So this guy is a crazy athlete. He has a lot of positional versatility. He can be used in the slot, in line. He can be used out wide as well. So this guy has a lot of positional versatility. He's in the Shanahan scheme here in San Francisco. The only issue is due to there being a lot of playmakers in this offense, and Brandon Ayuk for now, Deebo Samuel, them drafting Ricky Pearsall, obviously George Kittle, and having Christian McCaffrey, there are a lot of playmakers and mouths to feed. So his week-to-week consistency does suffer. He has a very low floor, but this guy has just about the highest ceiling of any tight end on a week-to-week basis. And when he gets hot, he gets really hot. And so a couple of stats to just show you how good he is. His 2.19 yards per team pass attempt was first in the NFL. His 15.7 yards per reception were good for first, so he's a vertical threat as well. His 2.26 fantasy points per target were good for second in the NFL, and his 0.46 fantasy points per route were good for third. So on a per snap basis and just overall, this guy is an elite asset for you in 2024. And so I think that he is starting to slow down just a little bit in terms of his on-field talent due to age. With a little bit of touchdown luck this year, he could easily finish as the tight end 1. And on a week-to-week basis, he has just about the highest upside of any one of these tight ends. So the S tier of tight ends consists of Evan Ingram, Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, Dalton Kincaid, and Sam Laporta. So at tight end 6, I have Evan Ingram. This guy's 6'3", 234 pounds. Now, he is 29.9 years old, so he is approaching age 30, so he could be due for a little bit of regression in terms of his on-field talent as he ages just a little bit. But in terms of being an athlete, he is one of the best tight ends we've ever seen in terms of athleticism. His 4.42 40-yard dash is in the 100th percentile. His 120.4 speed score is in the 97th percentile. His 125.5 burst scores in the 87th percentile. His 11.15 agility scores in the 91st percentile. And his 10.30 catch radius is in the 93rd percentile. And he's been a top 5 tight end both of the last 2 seasons, including a tight end 2 finish this past year. And he's averaged the 7th and 4th most fantasy points per game in this time. So this guy is Trevor Lawrence's preferred target when things go haywire. He feeds him consistently. In fact, his 143 targets were the most among tight ends this past season. Now, I would have him a little bit higher, but I do think that target total is going to dip just a little bit. See, what they did this year is they signed Gabe Davis, who's going to be their vertical X receiver, and then they also drafted Brian Thomas Jr. to be their vertical threat at the Z position. So I do think these players are going to command a little bit more of a target share than, say, Zay Jones did this past year. Then they still have Christian Kirk in the slot, and they're going to want to run the ball with Travis Etienne as much as they really can to take the pressure off of Lawrence. So I think that his target share and total targets are going to dip just a little bit, but he's still going to be a very good asset for you in 2024 fantasy football. And he's adept at yards after catch. In fact, his 516 yards after catch were good for second in the NFL this past year. Then you have his 1.60 yards per out run were good for 9th. And his 11.4 juke rate was good for first in the NFL among the tight end position. So he's very adept at being elusive after the catch and making people miss. And his 0.38 fantasy points per route were good for 10th in the NFL. So he's very efficient on a per route basis. And overall, he's one of the highest floor tight ends that there is. and he does offer a very, very solid ceiling for you as well. So my tight end 5 for the 2024 fantasy football season is Trey McBride of the Arizona Cardinals. He's coming off a tight end 7 finish, and that is considering half of the year, literally half of the year, he was a backup tight end. As soon as he was able to claim the starting job, from that point until the end of the year, he was the actual tight end 1 in fantasy football. That is how talented this guy is. So why isn't he a little bit further in these rankings? Well, they did draft Marvin Harrison Jr., so he is going to be relegated to the number 2 option in this offense, but that's still fantastic for a tight end, and he does have a special connection with Kyler Murray. So he's 6'4", 245, and he's still only 24.7 years old. His 4.6 140-yard dash is in the 89th percentile, and his 107.9 speed score is in the 85th percentile. So this guy is a very, very good route runner. He's very good after the catch, and he has a lot of positional versatility. He can be used at X, he can be used as a flanker, he can be used inline at tight end. He can be used in the slot as well. So keep in mind when I'm reading off these stats to you, this is basically with only playing half of a year. Half of a year. This guy finished with 81 receptions, which is good for 5th, 825 receiving yards, which is good for 7th, 439 yards after catch, which is good for 5th, 2.03 yards per route run, which is good for 2nd in the NFL. His 2.28 yards of target separation were good for 5th in the NFL. His 0.45 yards per route run was good for 5th in the NFL. And his fantasy points per target of 1.71 was good for 16th in the NFL. So overall, this guy is a very, very, very good tight end who's going to be in a very good offense. And his defense is going to be terrible. They give up the 2nd most total points in 2023, and that's not going to change here in 2024. So the Cardinals are going to have to be passing. Just overall, this guy has one of the better floors in the NFL and a massive ceiling on a week-to-week basis. So my tight end 4 is Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. Now, he is coming off a tight end 14 finish, but he was injured this past year. He's 6'5", 256, and is 28.9 years old. Now, this guy is the first tight end I've mentioned that is the clear number 1 target on his team with no doubt in my mind. This guy's incredibly talented. So his 4.67 40-yard dash is in the 79th percentile, and his 108.5 speed score puts him in the 86th percentile. So he's relatively fast considering he's 6'5", 256. And throughout his career, he's finished as the tight end 19, 5, 4, 1, 3, and 5 in fantasy points per game. So very consistently dominant. They have Lamar Jackson at quarterback. He has a special connection with Andrews. His only target competition in the passing game really is Zay Flowers, and he's definitely going to out-target Zay Flowers. They did bring in Derrick Henry, so they are going to be a little bit more run-heavy than they have been, but it's also going to increase the efficiency of the offense and present them with more scoring opportunities and help them convert on those scoring opportunities. He's going to be an elite asset for you. So a couple of stats to like. His 2.01 yards per route run was good for 3rd in the NFL. His 1.89 yards per team pass attempt was good for 2nd in the NFL. His dominator rating, which is his team's share of the yards and touchdowns, was 35.1%, 1st in the entire NFL. His QB rating when targeted of 133.5 was good for 2nd in the NFL. His 0.5 fantasy points per route was good for 1st, and his 2.22 fantasy points per target was good for 3rd in the NFL. This guy is as elite as it gets across really all of the metrics in general that matter. So on a week-to-week basis, he offers you a massive ceiling and a solid floor, being the number 1 target in a Lamar Jackson-led offense. So my tight end 3 is Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. He's coming off a tight end 3 season, which is his worst in quite some time. In fact, his fantasy points per game of 14.9 was his worst since 2016. He is starting to decline just a little bit, but he was so much better than all the other tight ends that he's still an elite tight end for fantasy purposes. He's 34.8 years old, so relatively close to retiring. Now, he's likely to still be the number 1 target in this Kansas City offense, and he is connected to Patrick Mahomes, so that's very good. They did, however, bring in some serious target competition. They drafted Xavier Worthy to be a vertical Z receiver in this offense. They have Hollywood Brown to play X, who is likely to be back by week 1, but even if he's not, he's going to be back at the beginning of the season generally. They still have Rashee Rice to man the slot, who isn't really as good as people think. His route running is atrocious. He's just a solid yards after catch guy who was schemed with a bunch of slant routes and drag routes. Basically, anyways, but still target competition. So with all those pieces around him, I do think that his target competition is going to make it a little bit harder for him to distinguish himself well above the other tight ends in this tier, but he's still so talented, and it's going to be such an efficient offense and is going to put up a lot of points that he could easily be the tight end one this year. He provides you with one of the better floors on a week-to-week basis and a massive ceiling. So my tight end 2 this year is Dalton Kincaid of the Buffalo Bills. He's coming off a tight end 11 finish while scoring the 14th most fantasy points per game as a rookie. Now, he's 6'4", 246, and is 24.8 years old going into his second year. So he was a little bit older as a prospect, but we don't really care. He's still plenty young. His 4.68 40-yard dash is in the 77th percentile, and his 102.0 speed score is in the 70th percentile. So he is a very good athlete at the tight end position. And his number 2 ranking is largely due to the fact that he's likely to be the number 1 target by a good margin in this offense. So they traded away Stephon Diggs. He can be a whiny person in Houston now, and he's their problem. And now Dalton Kincaid is the preferred target. They drafted Keon Coleman to be an X receiver. He's neither quick nor fast, struggles against zone coverage, and struggles to separate. Basically everything you don't want in an X receiver. Now he is a dominant ball winner and is going to be a threat in the red zone. He would be better used as a slot or a flanker. But when you look at their personnel, they have a bunch of slot receivers on this offense, or Z's, flankers. So he's probably going to be typecast into the X role, which is going to be great for Dalton Kincaid. The Bills' defense had an exodus of talent, so they're going to be terrible. They're going to have to throw the ball no matter what they want to do. Essentially, Keon Coleman and James Cook are his, and you could say Curtis Samuel / Khalil Shakir are his top target competition. I wouldn't be worried in the slightest. He's going to have one of the better floors among the tight ends and a massive ceiling this year. Draft this guy with confidence. He's going to dominate 2024 fantasy football. And at number 1, I have Sam Laporta of the Detroit Lions. Yet another Iowa tight end is set to dominate the NFL for years to come. He's 6'3", 245, and is 23.5 years old going into his second season. He went to the perfect situation. Ben Johnson has a wonderful thing going in Detroit. He has Jared Goff, who struggles with his arm strength, but it's perfect for Sam Laporta underneath. Sam Laporta is incredibly talented. Now, in terms of his athleticism, his 4.59 40-yard dash is in the 91st percentile, giving him a 108.4 speed score, which is in the 85th percentile. His 122.8 burst scores in the 76th percentile. His 11.16 agility scores in the 90th percentile. And his 10.15 catch radius is in the 79th percentile. This offense is going to be one of the most efficient offenses in the NFL. He's a wonderful athlete. He's very, very, very good at beating zone coverage. He knows where to hit the holes and stop so he's open. He scored 10 touchdowns, which may not repeat, but it absolutely could. This guy has crazy upside and a relatively safe floor on a week-to-week basis. Basically, it's just impossible for defenses to guard all of the players on this offense. Jamison Williams is a threat at the vertical X position to score a touchdown any time he touches the ball. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a dominant flanker and slot receiver who's going to receive a massive target share. Sam Laporta can play slot. He can play out wide. He generally is going to be an inline tight end, though. And then they have Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Basically, this offense is crazy. They're going to be among the league leaders in scoring. Ben Johnson's one of the most creative play callers. And Sam Laporta is just one of the better tight ends. I wish I had seen this coming so I could have gotten him in a couple more Dynasty leagues, but man, is this guy dominant. And while he did finish as the tight end 1, he also finished as the tight end 3 on a points per game basis, which you can obviously project him to get a little bit better going into year 2. So he was already one of the better tight ends in year 1, which is why I do project him to be among the league leaders once again in 2024. Now, a couple of advanced stats to like. His 1.78 yards per out run were good for 6th in the NFL. His 1.47 yards per team pass attempt were good for 8th. His 26.4 dominator rating was good for 3rd in the NFL. Remember, that's his share of the team's yards and touchdowns. That's impressive for a rookie, especially considering how much talent they have. His fantasy points per route of 0.48 was good for second, and his 1.99 fantasy points per target were good for fourth. This guy's great on a per snap and per route basis. He's in an unstoppable offense, and it shouldn't shock anybody if he's the tight end 1 once again, and he's absolutely going to repeat as a tight end 1. So there you have it. Those are my 2024 tight end fantasy rankings. So, what do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Please let me know in the comment section below. Is there anybody that I missed that should have been in these top 24 rankings? Please let me know who and why in the comment section below. With that being said, I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist, your NFL breaking news source, and the Dynasty and redraft implications behind said breaking news. I am building a library of information with which you can use to dominate your redraft and Dynasty leagues in 2024 and beyond. Please remember to check out my quarterback, running back, and wide receiver rankings for 2024. Please remember to like and subscribe. It would mean the absolute world to me. Thank you and have a good day.